Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very welcome at this session. I am Lieve Mostré. I'm the Chief Technology and Services Officer of Euroclear, and I'm also, for a number of years now, a board member of SWIFT. To be very correct, at one point in time, I was 100% of the female representation at SWIFT boards, but I became less important. Now I'm only 50% of that. Having been more than 30 years in finance, the topic of diversity is very close to my heart. I have seen us over those years talking a lot about the topic, even having many action plans, but very frankly, if we look at the results, those are quite poor. So it is my great pleasure that tonight we will be benefiting of the insights of somebody that is of the same generation. I would say in a part of business, quote unquote, that is even much harder to reach diversity, and I really hope that we will learn from her insights. I would like you to welcome Admiral Michelle Howard. She is an extremely high official in the US Navy. If we look at her bio, and I'm sure you have all done that, we see that she graduated in '82. And in '99, she was the first chief in command of the first big US Navy ship. So that in itself is already very impressive. Add to that she has been active in all of the operations we have heard of: Desert Shield, Desert Storm, peacekeeping in Yugoslavia. I'm sure we will all have a lot to learn to turn our actions into results in our sector. Admiral Howard, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, first I'd like to thank Dendi Smedley for inviting me, and for Sibos for inviting me to come speak. And I know some of you are going, wow, that's what an admiral looks like. And of course I'm going, this is what powerful financial regulators look like. That's pretty impressive. Lots of suits and ties, some lovely scars. Ooh, some Christian Dior out there. So you guys gave me a topic I have talked about before, change. Change, oh boy, we all deal with change. But you said, please talk to us about change and diversity. And some of you, if you had been given that task, would have said, well, that's a hard correlation. And I'm here to tell you it isn't. Change and diversity are very much intertwined. But let me start by, first slide, Jake, by talking a little bit about what I do for a living and what some of your navies do for a living. And let me sort of anchor from this last June to August in the rim of the Pacific exercise. So the Pacific is about 46% of the world's surface. It's a large area. And the reason this exercise runs from June to August is because it takes weeks for all of these navies to travel across from their different globes. And some of you are going to go, wow, that's where I'm from. Some of the navies that participated in this Pacific exercise, whether it's Norway or Malaysia, and this year for the first time, China. Well, why would the navies of the world get together and work together at sea? This is what we do for a living. We stay at sea, we stay at the high seas, but then when something happens ashore, we're on scene. We're the first ones there. And for all of our nation's leaders, they can go, hup, you happen to be in the neighborhood, can you go provide assistance? So in this particular exercise, we worked at humanitarian assistance and disaster relief cooperation. That picture up there, that big white ship is our hospital ship. And it also has the Chinese news hospital ship, the Ark, and we got our doctors together. One of the great things about navies is because the maritime domain is so unique, it is very easy for us to get together at sea and start operating together. The maritime domain forces you to go to ships. It forces you to go to certain types of standardization in communications, long-haul communications, and just all the what I call sub-tactical work, things like navigation. They're very similar across all the countries. I once had an Army general tell me he was envious of the way navies could come together and work together. And I have personally experienced this off the shores of Indonesia for tsunami relief effort, where ships from Singapore and Germany and Australia, we just fell in and started working together. That is the strength of our networking and the strength of our relationships. And that is to the benefit for all of our nations. Next slide. But this is not new. The global commons has existed for centuries. And in international law, the global commons is defined as the high seas, the space, the atmosphere. And so that top picture is a snapshot of the automatic information system. So large ships out there are required to have the equivalent to a beacon on them. So they just, all the time, International Maritime Organization and each other, we know where we are. But when you take a snapshot of all the merchant traffic around the world, and everybody's broadcasting, that's what it looks like at any given day. So the red means that's where most of the merchant traffic of the world is traveling. And it gets less traffic, it's yellow, and if it gets less traffic, it's light yellow and blue. But when you think about the global commons and all of that traffic, that's what navies do. We protect those lines, those areas, the global commons, where everybody's passing goods across the ocean. And it's a substantial amount of trade. So 70% of the earth is covered by water. 80% of the world's population probably lives within a couple hundred miles of the shoreline. And 90% of the world's trade goes by sea. 90%. You guys talk about market share, I got market share. But navies, we sit there and we believe, particularly in the high seas, it is our job to protect the global commons. And the way the global commons unfolded was for the benefit of all of mankind. Going back to Queen Elizabeth I, and I gotta admire a woman who has a large flotilla, by the way. Going back to Queen Elizabeth I, she said it is of public necessity that the seas be free to all. If you cannot trade and be safe on the high seas, then the market collapses. Sometimes it plays out and the public understands it. It's been playing out in the last 5 or 6 years with piracy. Ships get kidnapped. That's your cargo. You've got a ransom to get those, even more important than the cargo, the poor human beings who are just doing their job at sea. People have to be ransomed and then the cargo's lost. So protecting the high seas, all the navies do that. That's what we do. For me, for our founding fathers, when they were debating whether or not they should have a navy, in the Federalist Papers, they talked about the danger of capricious tyrants. That you want the world to be a safe place. You want to trust it's going to be a safe place, but you can always count on a capricious tyrant who will capture your ship. And then if you don't have a navy, there's nothing you can do. You just lose all of that economic good for your country. So what does it mean today? And what does it mean in terms of change? Well, when you look at the bottom line and you look at sea trade, it has quadrupled since 1970. What has stayed constant, though, is what does that blue line mean? About a third, 30% of that blue line is energy. It's liquid nitrogen gas moving, it's liquid petroleum gas moving, and it's crude oil moving around the world. It's moving between those red lines. The biggest red line of movement of energy is out of the Strait of Hormuz. 17 million barrels a day. Out of that red line, 85% of that out of the Strait of Hormuz is going to Asia. The customers are Japan, China, South Korea, India. And so you go, why is that important to you? Well, if the flow of oil is disrupted from the Straits of Hormuz, those are my country's big trading partners, Japan, China. If they don't have oil and they can't have energy to run their factories, those parts don't flow to my country. Thomas Friedman started years ago saying the world is flat. Well, I'm here to tell you it's still round, because I sail it. It's still round, but it is as interconnected physically as he postulates that it's as interconnected in the cyber domain. That we are one large market. So then you go, why is this important to you? Well, you guys, when you think about strategy, you think about landscape, I think about seascape. This is my seascape. And when you talk about change from 1970, so some of you think about where you were in 1970, and some of you are going, I was a child, yeah, I get it. To today, that's slow change, right? But I have to be aware of slow change. And what Peter Schwartz tells me in The Art of the Long View is I not only have to be aware of slow change, I have to think about alternate futures. I have to understand as a leader how much more trade is coming to this country than even in the 1970s. So even though the US got more efficient in the 70s, we're 88% more efficient as energy consumers than we were. The percentage of energy that we use has gone up 17% over that line. And you think about the OPEC oil embargo of 73, where by the time you got to 74, the price of energy had quadrupled. And then the energy crisis of 79 started by the Iranian Revolution. You could see our energy use dipped, but overall it kept growing. But I think about what it was like in this country during those time frames, when gas prices went up, when energy prices went up, and then that seems to have a cascading effect on employment. Well, if you think about what the impact was then, Peter Schwartz would tell me, think about what would happen if something similar caused the market to go down. And then it becomes my job to figure out what to do about it. That's understanding the slow change, thinking about the what if, and understanding you have to be able to respond to it as a leader. Next slide. There's another type of change, surprise. And some of you look at that and go, that looks like a colleague I work with. Nassim Taleb in his book, The Black Swan, talks about surprise. And he contends that you're gonna get surprised. That no matter how much work you put into thinking about change and figuring out your seascape or landscape, that we can never get the framework right all the time. He uses as an example the Thanksgiving turkey. The Thanksgiving turkey lives this life in the barnyard. Farmer comes in, feeds them, gives them water, patrols around, gets fed again. Life is supreme. And the turkey has some pretty good metrics. Every day, for about a year and a half, every day, turkey gets up, sun comes up, check. Turkey gets up, food's there, check. Farmer's there, check. Water's there, check. Great metrics. Day before Thanksgiving, snatched up by the farmer, head cut off. Whoa! Whoa, what a surprise. The turkey's framework was all wrong. He didn't know what was going on in the farmer's head. He had no way of knowing what was going on in the farmer's head. But that's a hell of a surprise, is it not? You can get surprised. I was surprised on 9/11 when I was in the building. I was surprised by the Arab awakening. You can get surprised, and then how do you respond to that surprise? How do you prepare for surprise? How do you prepare for change? Well, that gets me to the diversity piece. Next slide. So when I was a little girl, surprise! When I was a little girl, Star Trek came out. And It was one of the TV shows my mother let us stay up late to watch. She loved the science of it all. And for me, Uhura was my gal, because there was nobody else on TV who was doing what Uhura did. And I know it's easy for us to look back, but this was amazing. Look, Uhura had a Bluetooth in 1967. But Uhura, to me, was part of the team. She was being treated as an equal. And you think about what was going on in my country in the 60s, that's pretty important. Now, luckily for me, Martin Luther King and his family watched that TV show. In 1967, he happens to run into Nichelle Nichols, and she's thinking about quitting the show after the first season. And he goes, oh my goodness, no, you can't quit. And she goes, well, why? I want to go back into musicals and Broadway. He goes, no, no. On that show, you're treated as an equal member. And that is the most important message that you are providing. You're not being treated as a black member, you're being treated as an equal member. And that is a lot about the promise of diversity. Next slide. It's this teamwork that regardless of our different perspectives and experiences, we're all treated as valued team members. And it's important. And Star Trek's illustrated that. And it was far-reaching, because I'm telling you, I'm thinking it'd be hard for me to imagine a Russian in my crew today, just so you know. But women, Asians, aliens from other planets, how diverse can you get? But what a great team. But it also, when you have diversity at the top, you attract diverse members to your organization. They say, I can be successful. I can do those things. And for the appeal of a lot of people, it's being part of a successful team. The role model piece is important. If you don't have somebody who looks like you in the organization, you have a hard time believing you could grow up to be that person. And if you don't believe that's powerful, Gene Roddenberry, as fantastic as this was in '67, think about it if he had made Nurse Chapel a male and he'd made Scotty, the engineer, a woman. And think about it if Spock had been from the World Bank and an economist. What would your life be like today? I want to be like, all these kids would be like, I want to be like Spock. Right? And so what does this mean for the Navy? Next slide. This is the DDG-1000, the USS Zumwalt, named after CNO Zumwalt, who was a leader in diversity. When you're talking 1967, the time of Star Trek in the Navy, we were 2% female. That is because by statute in the United States, women were capped at 2% female of all the armed services. Women were not allowed to be admirals or generals. That was law. And in 1967, the law changed, and they lifted the cap. But the percentage of women going into the service was slow until we went to an all-volunteer force. So around the time I joined in '78, we were about 5% women. And we've continued to grow. We're about 18% women now, about 1 in 11. But also when you look at the Navy in '67, it was very homogeneous. Probably less than 1% were African American. And now across our force, we reflect the demographics of America. And so when you look at the crew of DDG-1000, this is part of the pre-com crew. You've got women in there, you've got people of color in there, people of different ethnic heritage. You also have the right answer. The captain in the middle, that's the guy with the 4 stripes. That is Captain Kirk. No kidding, his name is James Kirk. We almost got it right. He's James A. Kirk, not James T. Kirk. But he's the right guy to lead this team, this diverse team, on the DDG-1000, which is going to be one of our most innovative platforms in terms of energy usage and fungibility of energy. When you have a diverse team, you get different perspectives that allow you to succeed. Dr. Linus Pauling says it's not about getting and finding the good idea. It's about having a team that has lots of ideas and grabbing the best one. That's what diversity brings you. Next slide. So let me give you an example. So I had been in a job in charge of a task force to, we call it counter-piracy. You guys would call it fighting pirates. Glamour magazine called it hunting pirates. It's about pirates. 2 days into my job, the CEO of the Maersk Alabama was taken captive. This is a surprise situation. It's not that we didn't expect people could be taken hostage at sea. We understood that as militaries after the Achilles Laurel. And we had trained different people to do hostage rescue at sea, but we had always expected it would be a cruise ship being taken hostage. No one had thought about someone being taken hostage and put into a covered life raft. The way we train at sea is we expect to have a larger platform. We'll drop people out of helicopters. They'll maneuver around the ship. They'll find the guy or gal has been taken, or you'll find the bad guy on board, and then you get about your mission. This was completely different. While I was in command of the task force, one of the first things we found was when we talked to Maersk, the life rafts are fueled, and the pirates were driving that life raft to shore in Somalia. So our concern was they were going to get ashore in Somalia, and we'd lose all hope of ever rescuing Captain Phillips. So we had to figure out a plan to get the life raft stopped from going ashore without pressurizing the pirates so much that they would do harm to Captain Phillips. So I'm on another ship, and I pulled together 2 teams. And this piece about generating ideas, my teams were diverse. I put people on the team who might not at all be involved in the mission. I had Marines on board. I said, I want a couple of Marines on the team. They do things aggressively. We might need a dose of that. I put the meteorologist on the team, who happened to be a woman. This is about currents and plans. Turned out there was a retired FBI agent on board, and he was there working with the Marines, and he was teaching them law enforcement in case they had to go into Iraq. I go, I know you're not a hostage negotiator, but you understand more civil types of missions, and this is not a traditional military mission. So he said, I'd love to be on one of your teams. I put the lawyer on the team. And I made him in charge of one of the teams. He's like, this is the way it should be. And then I put our enlisted people, the people on the deck plates on the team. They were uncomfortable. One of them came up to me and said, we don't do planning. We do things. We are the doers. And I said, I've got a few hours here. I need plans, options that are feasible. And the people on the deck plate, you have got to tell the people in the room whether or not what you're coming up with is feasible. Because I don't have time to do a whole red cell and work my way through a war game. We got to know now. So I put the 2 teams together, gave them 40 minutes, and do what admirals do, went to have coffee. How's all my other missions going? Oh, look, there's another piracy attack up in the Gulf of Aden. Let's get another team going. So they came back, and they came back with the swoosh idea that some of you may have seen in the movie, where it's non-kinetic. In the middle of the night, Bainbridge gets up, pulls away from the life raft, backs off, and does a high-speed run, sort of like a ski maneuver. She runs across in front of the life raft at 30 knots, and the waves push the life raft back. The Somali pirates were disoriented. They were like, what just happened? And they were yelling out, what is going on? What has changed? And we didn't answer back. We waited 3 hours, and then they started up again, and then the second ship came in and did a swoosh maneuver. And then they started up again, and this was one of the suggestions of the enlisted people on the team. Then we used fire hoses to push them back, water to push them back. And at that point, they said, okay, we've had enough. We'll talk to you. And then at that point, they were ready to be towed. And at that point, the balance of negotiation and who had control of the situation shifted to us. So a diverse team will help you give lots of good ideas that will help you be successful. Next slide. So I think that's where my Navy is. It's this empowerment of people. It's harvesting their good ideas. But it happens out in any organization. Harvard Business Review talks about inherent diversity, your gender, your race, your ethnicity, and acquired diversity. Things you learn living in another country, cultural diversity, learning to speak another language. But they also point out companies that have diverse leadership, both acquired and inherited, those companies tend to out-innovate other companies. When they do surveys, 45% of the employees, or most of the employees go, we captured most of the market share in a new market with our company. And then what happens with companies that aren't diverse? Women will say, my ideas, 20% of the women will say, my ideas are not likely to be listened to. 25% of the African Americans will say, my ideas are less likely to be listened to. We're losing opportunities and ideas to be successful. So there is a very good reason for diverse companies, for diverse militaries, so that our people know they can grow up to be successful. We harvest their good ideas, we empower them, we listen to them, and we are successful as organizations. So that's my pitch, and I will take your questions. Thank you. Thank you. There will be someone coming around with a mic if any of you have a question. Just raise your hand, please. No questions? I'm the first speaker of the morning. Up, 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 up. Here we go.
I have a question about your journey getting to where you are. What would you tell yourself at 15, at 20, at 25, at 30, when you were experiencing adversity in your professional development?
Well, actually, the first adversity was at 12. I saw this documentary on service academies in my country, and I said, wow, I want to go do that. So I go talk to my older brother, and he's like, women can't go to service academies. What? He goes, it's against the law. What? And at 12, I was just stunned. How could there be a law that doesn't allow women to go to a service academy? And so then I think, okay, he's messing with me. So I go talk to my mother, and she goes, no, it's the law. You cannot go to a service academy if you're a woman. She goes, but here's what we'll do. If you still want to go when you're older, we'll sue the government. She said, think about it. She said, if there's something you think you want to do and it's right, you should persist and do it to the end. But you need to understand that the journey could take a long time, and you must not stop the journey. She said, so you might sue the government, you might actually win, but you might be too old to go to a service academy. She goes, but if other women get to go because of what you did, that is just as important. So what she taught me in one conversation is that you have to be persistent despite challenges, and you have to think about the benefit of everybody when you do something. And so that framework has stayed with me. Now, luckily for me, President Ford opened up the academies when I was 16, I applied when I was 17, and I was in Annapolis at 18. But I've used that same framework with other challenges. And so I also want to say thank you. I always say the first question's hard, particularly first thing in the morning. Yes, this is my personal coin. Really? Yes, really, yes.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, then always after I give out a coin, it's Pavlovian. It's amazing how many more questions I get.
We're all talking about Bitcoin. We should talk about our coin.
Our coin. Bitcoin, yeah. Please don't sell that on eBay. All right, any other questions? Yes, back here. Good morning.
Who is your role model?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Who's my role model? I've had a few. When I was little, it really was Queen Elizabeth I. It wasn't the dresses, it was the power. Harriet Tubman, who was an escaped slave and continued to, and these are women I read about, continued to leave slaves to freedom. And there's a lot I admire about a short woman with a long rifle that appealed to me. My mother. And then growing up in the Navy, CNL Zumwalt. And I was lucky, I got to meet him as a lieutenant commander, and he's the one who set us, like I said, on this diversity journey in 1972. Very charismatic man, but very inclusive in the way he thinks. So when I first met him, I was probably acting like a groupie, which is inappropriate, trust me. But he would give people time and access. And I just remembered that you have to give people time and access as a leader if you want to make them want to grow up to be a leader in your organization. So thank you for asking that question. I think I have time for one more question if there's, oh, wait. Pavlovian, here you go. Anybody else? No questions. Oh, in the guy, tan jacket, badge. And since you're the last question, I will come down and shake your hand.
Thank you so much.
No, Vikash, thank you.
I'm curious on how you may adjust globally when you travel across other countries where women are treated differently, there are different cultures, different statuses. Do you find your leadership style being adjusted?
No. People adjust to me. I'm an admiral.
Michelle, thank you so much for these wonderful insights. I have made a few notes. I have understood how diverse teams are so important so that we come up with more ideas, with better solutions to cope not only with change, but even more with the surprises. I have taken a very special note on the role model of your mother, the role model of your mother. And I think this is for all of us, many in the room are parents, fathers and mothers. Think about this. It is an important contribution to diversity. And then, very surprisingly, your first slide on the Navy's global relevance, I could not do anything else but notice the big similarity with SWIFT. Because if you would point out the flows, if you look about the role and the mission of protecting trade flows around the globe, it is so similar. So I think this helps us very much forward. We will complement your insights now with a panel discussion, and it is Virginie O'Shea that will introduce all our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.